Hey guys, it's Kesara, and today I'm going to be doing another tier ranking video. I'm so excited because today we're going to be tier ranking fantasy subgenres. So I did not create this video idea. I actually saw Angela from Literature Science Alliance do this, and she did this based off of a video that Jashana did, and the template that I'm going to be using is the same template that Jashana did in her video, so I'm going to link both of their videos down below. I loved watching both of them, and I'm really excited to do this myself because I feel like I have a lot of thoughts and opinions on fantasy subgenres because fantasy is like the main genre that I read, but there are so many subgenres for fantasy, and some of them I really love, and some of them I really don't. There are whole sides of fantasy that I just like don't at all. So we are gonna get into all of it, and let's just get this started. So this is the template that Jashana made. So she have give me all of it. So basically, like, if you really love this fantasy subgenre, give me all of it, you'll read all of it, then hell yeah. I don't know that reference, but it's great the way she says it. So basically that's like, maybe you won't read all of the books in that fantasy subgenre, but you'll read most of them and you're really excited for it. And then cool, I guess, something that's cool, but you know, you might read it, you may not. You don't really look for it. Then there's meh, something that maybe you don't like as much. And then super not my jam are basically fantasy subgenres that you just don't read at all. So I'm really excited for this. So the first one is alternate history, which is interesting for me because I don't really think of alternate history in like the fantasy perspective. Like I don't think I've ever read like specifically alternate history fantasy genres. I've read a lot of sci-fi that's alternate history that's like, you know, actually set in our world with people who like existed in our world back then. So I mean, I'm sure it's cool, but I don't like go looking for those sort of things. So I'm gonna put it as cool, I guess. That one doesn't really pique my interest that much, but I would definitely read it. Like, it's not something that I'm against. Then we have anthropomorphic fantasy. It's for fantasy with talking animals. For the longest while, I would probably say, no, I don't like that. But when I think back, like, to the middle grade books that I like, I actually really love talking animals. And then even some of the newer fantasy books that I've been reading, like, even just as of last year, like The Realm of the Elderlings, for example, they have the wit is one of the magic systems in which people can talk to animals, and I absolutely love the animals. Recently, Saga, there's a cat called Lying Cat who talks basically to tell people when they're lying, and it's great. So I think I love talking animals, and I'm gonna go with hell yeah. It's not something that I look for to read in fantasy, but I love it every time I see it. So next we have Arthurian fantasy, and honestly, I've never been super like into Arthurian fantasy. Not that I mind it. I don't mind reading it or watching like TV shows or movies about like Arthurian fantasy. The only one I can think of right now is Merlin, the TV show. Like, that's the only one I can think of that I have actually watched and liked. I'm not against it, but it's not something that I search out either. So I'm just gonna go with cool, I guess. Then we have assassin fantasy, and I don't know how I feel about assassin fantasy because I want to read assassin fantasy so much. I really want to read it, but I almost never end up liking it. I want to say that I've liked like maybe 10% of the assassin fantasy that I've actually read. And I've read many assassin fantasy books. Like, obviously Realm of the Elderlings is an assassin fantasy, but you also have Book of the Ancestor, Nevernight, Throne of Glass. Out of those four, I liked one of them. The other three are not bad, mind you, and Book of the Ancestor, I would say I like. It's just not one of my favorite series of all time, so like, I feel like I should say, like, give me all of it, because I will read all assassin fantasy that I see. Like, I will read it. I don't always end up loving it. I don't know. I'm still gonna leave it in the give me all of it category. I might change it down later, depending on how I feel. Then we have coming of age fantasy, and honestly, I kind of love coming of age fantasy, but like I like other kinds of fantasy also. Like, it's just a type of story, I think. It's just a type of plot, and I'm all there for the coming of age fantasy. So I'm gonna give that hell yeah, because it's one that I read often and I love it. It's not something that I particularly look for in books, but I enjoy it like a lot. Then we have Dying Earth fantasy, and this is another one that I'm just like, this feels a little bit more like a sci-fi trope to me. I mean, it is in the Broken Earth trilogy, and I like it in the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin, in case you're wondering. But honestly, that's not the reason why I picked up that series. It's not what I look for when I look for fantasy books. So I'm just gonna go with meh. I would so pick up sci-fi with a Dying Earth theme, but for fantasy, for some reason, I'm not as interested in fantasy with the Dying Earth. Like, I want more scientific backing and science-related things when it comes to like Dying Earth sort of ideas. So next we have erotic fantasy. Oh my gosh, we're not my jam. Yeah, I don't read that at all. Next, we have fairy tale fantasies, which, unpopular opinion here, I'm not a fan of the fairy tale retelling. Like, I've tried to be a fan of the fairy tale retelling, and there are some that I like for example, this Lunar Chronicles, I think are a great example of really good fairy tale retelling done right. But part of the reason I love the Lunar Chronicles is because it's not fantasy. Fairy tales are fantasy, but the Lunar Chronicles are sci-fi, and I think it's a really cool that you get that genre spin on it. I can't think of an actual fairy tale retelling that I like, and I don't really look to pick it up. The only reason I generally have fairy tale retellings is either because I just really think the idea of the story is cool, that's not the fairy tale side of it, or like I bought it because I want to read it in a readathon, and apparently readathons always have one category that's a fairy tale retelling or a retelling of some sort. So yeah, I'm not a fan of fairy tale retellings. I will read them, so I'm gonna put them as meh, but they're not my favorite. Next is futuristic fantasy, which I have to say, I don't think I've read a whole lot of futuristic fantasy. I honestly can't think of that much at all. The only one I could really think of is Saga, because it's like they have magic and it's in space and things like that. And of course they have like a spaceship that's made out of a tree, which is just awesome. Actual futuristic fantasy, I can't think of anything, but I would be down for it. Like, I would be interested in reading it. I'm gonna go with cool, I guess. I'm not like looking for futuristic fantasy. If I want a futuristic novel, I'll just read sci-fi, honestly, but I enjoy it when I see it. So yeah. So next we have magical realism and fabulism, which I always thought I would not like magical realism. I really thought I wouldn't, but I actually really love magical realism, especially when I read it as like contemporary novels. Then I love like the magical aspects to it. So I'm gonna go with hell yeah. I don't go out of my way looking for magical realism, but when I hear a book is magical realism, I'm just like, oh, that's really cool. Now I want to try and read it. So yeah, I'll definitely read them. So next we have military fantasy. I'm a little torn on this one also. Like, I'm a little torn on it because I do love a good military fantasy, but it's generally not the military aspect of it that I really like. It's generally the more political aspect, but then there's some military fantasy that I just really, really love. So I'm gonna go with hell yeah on that one also. I'm actually gonna move some of these things around a little bit just so they make a little bit more sense to how I feel about these categories. So that's more of like the order that I would put everything in. Back to military fantasy, I love reading about it, but it's not something that I search out, if you know what I mean. I feel like I might start searching out it a little bit more, but usually when I search out specifically for military fantasy, I don't end up liking the books. It's more of when I search a book that I think I'll like that has military aspects, I end up really loving it. Like, for example, The Poppy War. It's a military academy, and I think it's really cool, but I didn't look for it because it's a military academy, if you know what I mean. Then we have myth fantasy, and this is another one that I feel like a lot of people love myth fantasy. I do like reading about myths, but I very much prefer fantasy that is more unique and creative, that don't try and make a spin on like certain myths. And like sometimes it doesn't bother me, and I think it's really cool when it's incorporated in the story, but I also feel like a lot of myths are overused, and like we kind of get the same thing over and over again because they're using the same myths over and over again, when I feel like it would just be interesting to see something cool and new. I think it's cool, I guess. I'll read it, but I don't know if it's something that I really search for. Next we have paranormal fantasy. I'm gonna go with super not my jam on this, and probably, I mean, less so than erotic fantasy, but still super not my jam. So paranormal fantasy, when I hear that, I think urban fantasy, and specifically like vampires, werewolves, fae, all of that sort of thing, which there was a time in my life when I was super into all of that. Honestly, I feel like it's just not super creative anymore. Like it's been done so many times, and a lot of times I feel like it's just not good world building. Now sometimes there is something a little bit different about the paranormal fantasy that like sets it apart from other paranormal fantasies. For the most part, I don't care for paranormal fantasy that much at all. And then we have political fantasy, and you guys know, oh my gosh, that is like the end all and be all for me. I love a good political fantasy. It's like my favorite thing in fantasy. So yeah, definitely give me all of the political fantasy. If you guys have political fantasy suggestions that you think I should read that I haven't already, drop a comment down below. Anything you say is a political fantasy, like that is automatically on my TBR, like 100%. Next we have portal fantasy, and for that, I'm gonna go with give me all of it also. Not cool. I think I'm gonna go with portal fantasy over, oh wait, that's political fantasy. No, political fantasy is first, then portal fantasy, and then assassin fantasy. Portal fantasy, one of my favorite tropes of all times is a multiple worlds trope. I love multiple worlds tropes in any way that it's done, whether it's following the many worlds theory, with it's just like every action that you make, it creates like another world in which you made one decision or the other, and then also just like random worlds that we never knew existed and things like that, or just completely fictional worlds. I think that's just the best thing ever. I love portal fantasy because of that, because it lets you go into different worlds. My favorite thing about portal fantasy is seeing characters from very different worlds interacting with each other. I think it's just the coolest thing ever, and I really enjoy that. But I've yet to find a portal fantasy that I absolutely love. So like, yes, give me all of it and I will read all of it, but I've yet to find one that I just like truly love so much. So if you have a good portal fantasy out there, please let me know in the comments, because I would need some more good portal fantasy in my life. Then we have steampunk, and I don't know with steampunk. Like, I really don't know. I'm going to put it in cool, I guess. I feel like it's something that I would potentially really like, but I really haven't read very much steampunk at all, so I don't know whether I would like it or not. I don't think I have that much to say about it. I don't even know where to start with steampunk, to tell you the truth. Then we have sword and sorcery, which is, hell yeah, I'll read pretty much any sword and sorcery book I see. Like, it's kind of like a guilty pleasure for me. It's not a, like, give me all of it, because I do think it does get repetitive after a while, but yeah, I'm there for sword and sorcery any day of the week. And lastly, we have urban fantasy, which I kind of want to put as super not my jam. Like, I kind of do. But the reason I don't like urban fantasy is because of the paranormal fantasy elements, because a lot of urban fantasies are also paranormal fantasies. But I found urban fantasy that it's not paranormal, but closer to the high fantasy range, I tend to actually really like. So, cool, I guess? I'm gonna go with cool, I guess. And I want to put it in front of steampunk, because I feel like I'm more likely to pick up an urban fantasy than a steampunk, even though I feel like they're very similar. But yeah, anyways, this was a fun video. I enjoyed making that. So that is my tiers. Like, I'm a little surprised by it, because I only have 3 like top tiers when it comes to like fantasy genres. I thought that I would have more than that, but there's only 3, and then I have a lot in the hell yeah and the cool, I guess, and I don't have as much in the like the meh and the super not my jam, because like I said, I read a lot of fantasy. I'll read almost any fantasy I see, like even in the meh, like fairy tales and dying earths, like I'm still gonna pick those up. The only ones that I really like actively stay away from would be like paranormal and erotic fantasy, which I think also kind of go hand in hand sometimes also. So if you like this video, let me know in the comments and where you guys would put some of these fantasy subgenres. I post videos on Sundays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, so consider subscribing. And if you want to be notified as soon as I upload, you can click that little bell icon. If you like this video, please give it a big thumbs up to support my channel. All social media links are in the description down below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.